Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today we had the big release trailer for Expedition 3.15 expansion. I want to go watch the trailer with you first, and then go through my thoughts. There's also the Expedition info page, which we'll discuss. But firstly, let's just start with the trailer, and I'll pause it occasionally and give you my thoughts as we go through.
Many centuries ago, our people traveled to this accursed continent.
So we're being introduced to a new group of NPCs here. And we'll see some gameplay relevant stuff later.
We return to reclaim our lost relics. But Rayclast grips its secrets tightly. We must wrench them from it.
So what you saw there was the detonation of a detonator. What that does, if you can think of this League mechanic as somewhat similar to Legion, except instead of using your combat skills against frozen enemies in order to work out what you're going to be releasing, you're going to be using these detonators, which you can strategically place where you want them in order to determine which monsters you release. And later on, you'll see that there's ways in which you can amp up an entire encounter as well. So here's the fight. And a whole bunch of monsters this time.
You know violence. We know trade. Retrieve our relics and...
Now here, you're going to have the option to trade with these NPCs. You'll be picking up these relics and then you can trade them in for various rewards. So here you see 5 alchemy orbs for, this 26 of this new Parandus coin type of currency that you'll get. Seems like there's quite a few different currency items. But don't worry, they won't take up any real storage space. And there's been some massive improvements to the League-specific inventory boxes. So things like the Heist Locker and the new version of the Heist Locker that's coming in for this League will be much more convenient.
And we'll strike a deal.
This one's interesting. One of the NPCs allows you to purchase an item, but then you get the ability to modify that item further. So here, add a prefix modifier 5 times, but only keep the best outcome. So you've already committed to purchasing this amulet at this point, but then you can use something that is like using an Exalted Orb on it, and it seems like you can keep going with that as well. So the first time you do this, you'll be able to add a prefix. The next time you might be able to add a suffix. Then after that, you'll be able to double annul it, but with a targeted annul that only hits the lowest level requirement stats. And so this seems like it's a really interesting mechanic. Got to see how it plays out, but I think it could create some really good items.
We will follow the path of our forebears to discover their unknown fate.
This looks like it's the new mechanic that I'm thinking of as this League's equivalent of blighted maps, although it could be wrong on that. We're going to have to see the details when we actually get to play them. It'll be encounters where you're doing a massive expedition. So we have 19 new skill gems. I'm going to go through these later, so I'm just going to play them all. But there's essentially one that is thematically tied to each of the 19 different ascendancies. Some of them are more tightly tied to that ascendancy than others, but we'll discuss those when we go to looking at the actual expedition information page that GGG put up. Yes, that's Diablo 2's Frozen Orb before. This Rage Vortex looks really interesting. And this is one of the League bosses, I assume. This may be too.
Finally challenge them. Wealth and power will be yours should you survive our expedition.
Alright, so that is the Expedition official trailer. At this point, let's jump over to the GGG site and go through everything that's listed on the Expedition site now, because this has a whole bunch of information in it. So firstly, you're going to be joining the Kalguran expedition, excavating their relics, and they're also the undead guarding them, using chains of explosives, then barter, deal, and gamble those relics with their merchants. This is going to contain A lot of things you expect, so the new Challenge League, new NPC traders, new skill and support gems, new base item types, and new uniques. But the thing that's really interesting, and I think a lot of people weren't expecting, there is going to be a massive overhaul of Flasks. This is, broadly speaking, pretty sweeping nerfs to Flasks, but the idea is to remove the need to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 continually do Flask Piano 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 while you're mapping. Instead, they're trying to make it so that Flasks are more strategically used. Additionally, the thing that I think no one was expecting was Path of Exile Royale returning. This is the Battle Royale mode that they introduced as a joke on April Fool's Day in 2018. I was really gutted. Like, in my 9 to 5 at the time, I was in crunch mode on a project, and I did not get to play Battle Royale once, and I was really gutted by that. So it is back. It is going to be running every weekend. So it's available right now as I'm recording this, but it will be available every weekend during the league except for launch week. And then they're thinking that they may make some overhauls of it afterwards. So that should be really good. And we'll get to Royale later. I'm going to be, as soon as this video is up, I'm going to start streaming Battle Royale because it just looks like so much fun. The other thing that's mentioned here is that they're making massive balance changes to make Path of Exile more challenging. So that's also part of the Flask reworks thing. Again, the main things that I'm taking away from this is that a lot of the pure more multiplier support gems are being nerfed, and we'll see hard numbers on that later. And there's a bit of philosophy on that that Chris Wilson was discussing in the Q&A afterwards. But fundamentally, the concept that they're doing there, that they're going for, is that they want players to upgrade items more often. They want them to also to probably fail some of the endgame bosses a little bit more. And I'm personally looking forward to that. I always find that I'm having more fun when I'm being defeated by encounters than when I'm dominating them. And so I'm looking forward to that. And if anyone's watched my guide to the Maven's Invitation, the form that I put up, the Shaper Guardians, you'll see that like I was having an absolute blast in that because I intentionally went in a not all that strong character, and that just made the fight so much more fun. So this is some more discussion of the mechanics of the expedition, and basically you plant your explosives. They will trigger various chests. As I said, very similar to Legion thematically, but you're not smashing up, crystalline statues. You are instead smashing open using detonators that will do it for you. Now, this is the trading mechanics. And so here, there are 4 different types of artifacts. I would think of these as being like the Parandus coins of this league. They're something that you trade with the various NPCs, and they look like they stack well. That's something I was quite concerned about. Like whenever you're playing and you get a drop of these, let's say that a monster was going to drop 68 of the lesser broken circle artifacts. They've set it up so that it will drop in 2 stacks. So you might get 57 in one stack, 11 in the other. So that seems like it'll be quite fine. We've got a couple of little screenshots of things that you can trade for here. So the first one is the gamble screen. People who've played Diablo 2 back in the day will be very familiar with this. You purchase an item from the NPC and it can then be, it will then be somewhat random what you actually get. So you might get a magic item that's terrible. You might get a unique item that's chase. There are no items that are exclusive to this system, and it's just pure luck what you get. I think this is going to be a bit of fun. It's not just as simple as using a chance orb on an item. You'll sometimes get influenced items, and we'll just have to see how that works out in practice. Generally, though, I think that this is something that's only going to be worth doing if the item level is 86, but we're going to have to see. Next up, you have the NPC that allows you to trade items, but that also modifies them. So you'll trade for, you might decide you wanted to buy this mall from them. I can't see why you would buy that mall, but anyway, let's just say that you did. And then there'll be various things that will modify that item further if you spend more on it. And lastly, we have the haggle window, where they will reveal a whole bunch of items that you can purchase from them. You can offer to pay full price, in which case you always get it, or you can make a lowball offer and see if he accepts it or not, or if he counters. That'll be a little bit of a fun mini game until we work it out. Okay, so next up we have the expedition logbooks. These are essentially, like, these are the things that I think of as being, broadly speaking, this league's equivalent of blighted maps. Although I do want to see the full gameplay of one of these before I'm absolutely certain that they're more like blighted maps, and rather than being, say, something that's more compact and shorter like a standard heist. So these will have their own items, and they'll be basically a scaled up version of the expedition content. Now we have some of the, what they're terming exotic treasures. These are new defense. This is a new defensive stat called Ward. So currently the defensive stats in the game are armor, energy shield, and evasion. Ward is a new thing along these lines. And the closest equivalent in the game, at least in the way that I understand it, is the elemental Aegis that the elementalist can get, where essentially you have a shield that depletes when you take hits, and it reduces. So when you suffer a hit, the damage is eaten by the ward first, and then the ward will replenish itself over time. So in that way, in some ways, it's sort of a bit like energy shield, but it seems like it will replenish in a different fashion. Anyway, what we've got here is a couple of examples of items with ward on them. So this Grim Soul Runic Greaves is sort of all right. And then you've got, well, we'll come back to this because it's one of the most interesting unique items that we've got. Here we have this Faith Guard, which has got intelligence, increased ward, faster restoration of ward, which is going to be a huge one. And essentially what ward does is protects you from one-shots when you haven't been hit for a while. So very similar to other defensive mechanics that you see sometimes on evasion builds, Wind Dancer and Ghost Shrouds on the Trickster. These sorts of things that protect you somewhat from being one shot when you're at full life, or from being hit as hard when you're at full life, but that then are turned off for a few seconds after you do take a hit. Faith Guard is really interesting because increases and reductions to maximum energy shield instead apply to ward. That sounds like it could be something that's pretty significant. One question I've got, and this wasn't answered during the live stream, was whether this is considered a global defense, because there is that pretty powerful mod, 100% increased global defenses on the unique chest Skin of the Loyal, and so that's something that might work together there. So, Cadigan's Crown. This, I feel, is probably going to be a very rare item. So it has the same drawback as Resolute Technique. You never deal critical strikes, but it grants you Battle Mage. What Battle Mage does is it grants you I believe it's just your main hand weapon. Your main hand weapon's damage is all added to your spells. This could be really interesting in conjunction with mechanics like, in conjunction with weapons that have tremendous base damage like Rebuke of the Vile. So I'm interested to see how this works out. I think there'll be some sort of shenanigans you can play with this, and I'm just, keen to see what people build around it. Never dealing critical strikes is a huge drawback. That said, I do believe that this is probably a very hard item to get your hands on. Also, never deal critical strikes has another really serious drawback. You can't use it with Elemental Overload either. So, 19 new gems. The first one is themed around the Scion Ascendant, and it is Spectral Helix. This is essentially Spectral Throw, but the projectile goes in a different direction. It's like Val Spectral Throw is currently, but it's something that you can spam. I really like the look of this. They were doing some demonstrations of it during the longer version of the stream, and it looks like it's quite a cool skill. That said, the numbers are going to be essential. 160% base damage at level 1 is pretty good. And this has no drawback to attack speed, but it doesn't look like it clears all that well. So we're just going to have to see how this plays out in practice, but interesting skill anyway. So we have a number of skills that are themed around the Marauder's Ascendancies. So we have firstly Bone Shatter. Bone Shatter is Juggernaut themed. This deals damage to yourself as well, and it attacks enemies with a forcible melee strike that also hurts you. Successive uses will raise the damage dealt to enemies and to you. Stunning an enemy with this strike releases a damaging pulse. This is only usable with a mace, scepter, an axe, or a staff. So it adds flat physical attack damage. Note that this is adding attack physical damage, which is usually something that's really strong in conjunction with face breakers. However, Bone Shatter explicitly excludes being used with unarmed. So this gains you a debuff called Trauma. Debuff/buff called Trauma, where you take 6 physical damage per trauma when you gain trauma. So the first time that you use this skill, you'll take 6 damage. The next time you'll take 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, and so on and so on. However, this skill does more damage per stack of trauma that you've got on you. I'm assuming that 6 physical damage per trauma scales really high as Bone Shatter gains gem levels. Interesting to see how you can do this, how you can scale this at endgame. It certainly seems like an interesting concept for a skill, but it's also a strike, and honestly, I just hate playing strike builds. That said, it's a cool thing for people that like strikes. Rage Vortex is a more AoE-centered melee skill. When you hit an enemy, it then conjures a ball of, it just conjures this sort of moving storm that slowly progresses forward, and it slows down when it hits an enemy and doesn't kill it. So that seems like it's really interesting. It sacrifices rage when you use it, and that means that it's probably only going to be viable on a berserker or a build that has very carefully built around it. And the fact that the attack speed is 70% of base means that it'd be interesting to see how this works out in practice. I don't know what the damage is going to look like on this. We haven't got any... it's really hard to judge how the damage is going to be from the info we've seen. Earthbreaker looks fantastic. This is the ancestral totems for slams. This looks fantastic, and it's sort of intended as a chieftain theme. They showcased it in in the original stream that GGG put up with Tectonic Slam. Tectonic Slam is probably the weakest of all the slams at the moment, and I think it'll be better with one of the better slams, unless, of course, Tectonic Slam has been improved or the other slams have been nerfed. So, next up we have the Duelist Ascendancy related ones. So we have Defiance Banner, which is a purely defensive option for the champion. Seems pretty interesting. Got to just see the hard numbers on it. But ultimately, I did a bit of a poll during my live stream during my restream and asked people, do you ever plant banners? And the answer was no. So yeah, we'll just have to see what happens. People just use them for their passive buffs usually. But ultimately, getting nearby allies have 30% increased evasion rating and armor is useful. Nearby enemies have reduced critical strike chance is great. So yeah, I think this could be quite solid. Shield Crush is a really fascinating gladiator themed skill. So this is essentially a single target version of Spectral Shield Throw. Spectral Shield Throw is also being buffed, and I think it will be really interesting to see where this goes. It can do a lot of physical damage if you can get yourself a shield that has a massive amount of armor and evasion rating. Note that this does not scale off energy shield at all, whereas Spectral Shield Throw does. So you're going to want different shields for the two skills, although I think you could just use the same armor and evasion shields are probably going to be the ones that are best. Behead Support is next, and this is Slayer themed. This is really funny. This is like a mini Headhunter buff for your character. So this will grant you killing blows against rare monsters, grant one of their mods for 20 seconds, which is just going to be really fun. Ultimately, I think this is going to be the sort of thing you'll put in conjunction with a culling skill on a non-Slayer build, rather than it being something that you will use on a Slayer, even though it is Slayer themed. But basically, having killing blows grant you one of their mods is going to be a lot of fun. So additionally, 20% chance to refresh duration of granted modifier by up to 5 seconds when you hit a rare or unique enemy with supported skills means that you will generally have one of these mods up. But when you get a new mod, you will replace the old ones. And that's not sort of very clearly stated within the support gem. Ultimately, this is a cool toy, but being strike skill specific is going to be pretty limited. The way that I would use this is going to be to link Culling Strike and Behead support to some strike skill, and then just use it at the end of a fight against a tanky rare. And then you might use that if you're in an area where you're really struggling for extra power. Okay, so from the Ranger perspective, we have Storm Rain, which looks like an intriguing concept where you fire up arrows into the air. So in that sense, it's sort of a bit like your Toxic Rain type skills. But each of these projectiles, when it lands, then pulses lightning damage to nearby enemies. So we'll have to see how this works in practice. Again, we don't have any hard numbers or any serious experience with these skills, but it looks interesting. Explosive Concoction we'll come back to in a sec. Focus Ballista support is really cool. This changes a ballista so that it only fires when you do. And that is genuinely really dangerous because it means that you need to stay and attack the boss. The ballistas will then all attack the boss that you're attacking. So if you can stand your ground, Focus Ballista support will be a tremendous damage multiplier for a lot of skills. You'll have a 6-link Focus Ballista and Siege Ballista setup, and then additionally you'll have your own direct attacks. I think it'll be interesting to see ballistas being used in ways that aren't just around Siege Commander. So I'm kind of happy to see this. Now we have the oddball, Explosive Concoction. This requires you not to use a weapon, and also involves you literally throwing charges from your ruby, sapphire, or topaz flasks to add further damage. So this is really intriguing as a skill. It basically causes you to deal, you're dealing considerable base fire damage. If you have a sapphire flask, it'll add some cold damage. If you have a topaz flask, it'll add some lightning damage. And if you've got a ruby flask, it will add more damage with ignites. So yeah, a really intriguing skill here. Something that's totally unlike anything else in the game. Don't know if it'll be good or not. Again, that's just going to come down to the numbers. Now there's the shadow themed skills. We have ambush support. Ambush. It's not ambush support. I immediately see the name and think it's a support gem. So this teleports you to an enemy and gives you a brief buff that causes you to deal to have better critical strike chance and more critical strike multiplier, and also blinds the enemy. So this looks like a really interesting tactical movement skill. The way that this was being used was in the demonstration that they did in the GGG live stream, was they were fighting Atsuri with it, and that every time Atsuri cast her Flame Blast, they would use reverse dash, so dash with shift held down to get away from Atsuri, and then once the Flame Blast had exploded, they would then use ambush to teleport next to her, and then immediately fire off that exerted attack that would have the 200% increased crit and 100% increased crit multi. Obviously assassin themed, although it's not only usable by assassins. Blade Trap is Saboteur themed and is a trap skill that makes attacks for you. Now this only works with daggers or claws, which I didn't pick up when they were talking about it during the live stream. So if you watch my live stream, you'll see that I discuss it and I think of using two-handers with it. That's not an option. It's a dagger or claw, and it will make repeated melee attacks at a distance with a trap. This could be really interesting. I have to think extensively about what sort of weapons you would use this with, because a Saboteur immediately makes me think, like, you probably want Elemental Conversion because of some of the shenanigans that the Saboteur has on it from memory. I need to give this a lot more thought, but there's probably a build there. What we don't know is what the area of effect is going to be like on this. Does it gain considerable amounts of increased melee reach at higher level, or is it always going to be a small skill? If it's always a small focused area, then it's just going to be something you'd only use on bosses, which may still find a use. On the flip side, if you can scale its AoE considerably, then it could be quite interesting. Voltaxic Burst is one of the more bizarre looking skills. It's really sort of impactful in how much it makes the screen flash and, you know, flash with purple lightning. But basically, casting this, it feels fundamentally it's a lightning and chaos themed alternative to Winter Orb. But where Winter Orb uses projectiles, so you charge it up for a while, then you're getting the projectiles firing off, Voltaxic Burst is a Nova instead. This is either going to be really good or really bad. My gut says it doesn't look like it will be a very strong skill. It doesn't look like it will project damage very well. And it has a tricky type of damage to scale where you've got lightning and chaos damage simultaneously. But I'm very open to being proven wrong on that front. Additionally, one other thing I should say with this is that Voltaxic Burst might have some shenanigans available with Eternity Shroud. So this is dealing 40% conversion to Chaos. There may be a way to raise that to 50 or 50% via quality or alternate quality. We don't know that yet. But even if you can't, with one Call of the Brotherhood, that's 88% conversion away from Lightning, 40% directly to Chaos, and 48% to Cold. Then you might use Cold to Fire and Pyre to convert most of that to Fire in conjunction with the Eternity Shroud. I don't know if this is going to be good or not, but it's an interesting thought experiment to see if it will be. Witch-oriented, you have Forbidden Rite, which is a cultist. We'll come back to that in a sec. Eye of Winter is a direct transfer of the of Frozen Orb from Diablo 2. It looks really, really cool, and will probably be a skill a lot of players are just going to force to work. One thing that I've noticed with these cold skills lately is that there's a lot of interesting ways to scale cold skills in the game at the moment that involve converting to fire, and that's definitely something you could conceivably do with this skill. So you could start this with 2 replica cold iron points. You won't have those immediately at League start, of course, but once you're able to get them, and then using cold to fire support and the unique ring Pyre to convert your damage to fire, and then use a Blizzard Crown to add more damage to it. Don't know if that'll be good or not. We're just going to have to see hard numbers on this skill. Summon Reaper is a new minion skill that it does not play well with other minions. So Summon Reaper is going to be something that you will use potentially, well, there's a couple of ways you could do it. You could use it in conjunction with a Heartbound Loop spellcast loop, Heartbound Loop spellcast loop that uses summon skeletons. So your Reaper then pretty much will consume those skeletons, and then you will suffer damage, and then a cast while damage taken loop will go. That's something that I will leave to content creator Justice, who will come up with some fantastic things with that, I expect. But your Reaper will eat your other minions. Do not use this in conjunction with Animate Guardian. Do not ever use this with Animate Guardian. But this minion deals massive damage and inflicts bleed with those attacks. One thing that I thought of when I saw Summon Reaper, and I don't know if this will be strong or not, it was just a possible build option. There is the little used Bloodlust support, which causes you to deal a lot more damage to enemies that are bleeding with a specific attack skill, but that attack skill loses all capacity to inflict bleed. Well, with Summon Reaper inflicting bleed on an enemy, and particularly with Chance to Bleed support linked to Summon Reaper, assuming that that's an option, you could then have your Summon Reaper running around inflicting bleed, and then that would remove all of the drawbacks from Bloodlust support. Bloodlust support's numbers haven't been good enough to merit using it in recent times, but with some of the rebalancing of skill gems that they're doing in this, support gems in particular, that may end up being worthwhile. So, Forbidden Rite we skipped here. Now, Forbidden Rite looked terrible when it was being used. However, we're just going to have to see exactly how it works. I think you can mitigate a lot of the drawbacks on this by having a lot of chaos damage. Sorry, a lot of chaos resistance. So, you suffer 40% of your maximum life and 25% of your maximum energy shield as chaos damage. That's a lot. However, you deal a massive percentage of your life and energy shield as base chaos damage to multiple projectiles. It fires projectiles at up to 7 surrounding enemies. Up to 6 surrounding enemies at level 1. This skill will deal tremendous amounts of damage to you that you must mitigate. I think the only ways you can use this, you could use this with Chaos Inoculation, in which case you're going to only be dealing 5% of your energy shield pool as base chaos damage. So if you've got 12,000 ES, then you're dealing 600 base chaos damage plus the small amount of flat chaos damage the skill has. I think it's going to be more powerful on builds that use Divine Flesh in order to get their chaos resistance up to the sort of, up to the, maybe even the 90% cap. But even if they're not going to the 90% cap, something in the 80s would be really strong. Additionally, this skill feels like it might be useful in conjunction with the unique shield Mahoxidal's Machination, assuming that that is available in the new league. We don't yet know because that was an ultimatum-specific drop. So next up we have the Templar Ascendancies, various skills that are themed around those. Mana Bond looks really interesting. This is a skill that I erroneously thought looked like a slam skill in the first trailer that was released. This causes lightning damage based upon your missing mana in a circular area around the targeted location, as well as extension areas. The extension area's side depends upon your remaining mana. So what this means is that if you have a mana pool of 8,000 and you're currently sitting at 2,000 total mana, then you have 6,000 missing mana. That 6,000 missing mana will scale up the damage, and then you will have increased length per 25% of your unreserved maximum mana that you've got. This is a really strange skill that may actually work quite well. The way that I was thinking of using this is in conjunction with Arcane Cloak. What you would do is you would build a mana stacking build as normal. When you're fighting against trash monsters, you want to optimize your damage projection and not really optimize the damage output. So you're just going to be using the skill while at full mana. Then when you encounter something tougher, fire off Arcane Cloak, which will consume a lot of your mana, and then you will start thumping the ground, casting Mana Bond repeatedly, specifically targeting that tough enemy. I think it'd be a really interesting playstyle. And one thing that we can say about the mana stacking builds is that they've been good for a while now, so it may be a very strong setup. Absolution was Guardian themed and was basically explained by Chris Wilson as being sort of like a ranged version of Dominating Blow. To be honest, I lost interest at that point, but if you're interested, you can definitely check it out and see how it works. Lastly, we have the Inquisitor-themed Battle Mage's Cry. This is really, really, really interesting. It causes you to trigger spells with, so this is a war cry that taunts enemies around you to attack you and exerts your subsequent attacks. And you can then trigger the skills when you attack during that period. So exerted attacks trigger a supported spell with their first melee hit. This is really interesting. And we're just going to have to try and mess around with this and see if we can make it work. I think there's a lot of potential for this. I also don't think it's something that you're going to want to use on an Inquisitor. I think you're going to want to use it on something completely different. But if you're playing a build that can manage to scale, that can manage to simultaneously scale spell damage and attack damage somehow, like for instance an Elementalist can do, then Battle Mage's Cry looks like it could be really solid. Now, here is the section where they talk about nerfs. So one of the things that was shown during the original live stream was a sort of a chart of that tried to track player power over time. And one of the things that was really substantial there was you would see that every expansion, like with Ascendancy and Harvest were the biggest jumps, but every expansion increased player power. And so what GGG's goal is to do is to have not a complete reset of this, but somewhat of a reversal of this trend. In recent leagues, what they've had to do has been to balance encounters that are league specific around our character's power. And this is really clear in Ultimatum, where in Ultimatum they decided, all right, we want the Ultimatum encounters to be hard, but they were so much harder than the surrounding map that it was just a really jarring disjoint. So let's say that you were playing a character that could comfortably do tier 16 maps, but that wasn't absolutely dominating them. You would usually find that the ultimatums that were the most reasonable to complete were somewhere around tier 6 or tier 7 maps. And so, you had to gain a lot more power before you could do the ultimatums in tier 16 maps. What they're trying to do is raise the challenge of the general content in the game, and doing that by reducing some of the power creep that our characters have gained over the last period of time. So what this is going to look like concretely is reducing the power level of pure damage support gems. So things like brutality support are probably going to get considerable nerfs. And then there's a big one, making triggered skills cost mana. Tweaking the most powerful movement skills and making enemies in the first act more dangerous. I'm not sure that the enemies in the first act being more dangerous is going to be is going to be particularly well received by the newest of players. Although, like I certainly have fun when I do get challenged from day one in a league. The thing is that having it be like, if they've made a situation where Act 1 is quite a bit harder and then Act 2 is snooze mode afterwards, I think that will be poorly received. But anyways, we'll see how that goes. Overall, I am interested to see how this goes. I think it will probably end up prolonging the fun part of a league. You find that in Path of Exile, people hit a point where they get bored with a league, and usually that's where their character becomes so powerful that the highest tier content that they've got access to is no longer particularly fun. I think that this will prolong the period where tier 14, 15, and 16 maps remain fun. And it will slow down early league progress considerably. I'm looking forward to this. I know some people probably won't be, but just looking forward to bosses that have become a snooze fest becoming more engaging again as well. So yeah, that's the nerf section discussed, and then we have the flask system rework. So flasks are being transformed considerably. Essentially what they're doing is that utility flasks are mostly being nerfed pretty noticeably. And then there are 2 new orbs that are being introduced. So flask gain is being hammered. Flask gain is being reduced severely. And I think that one of the things that Chris Wilson was saying is that there's a 75% less modifier to flask charge gain, and they still think that without the other changes, you could still spam them for most of maps. So the idea that they're going for is that flask use will be more tactical, less spammy. You won't have your flasks up all the time. You will use them when you specifically need them. So this is an example of a Basalt Flask under the new system. Instead of its current very powerful effect of 15% physical damage reduction, it's going to have 20% more armor instead. And it will taunt nearby enemies on use. That changes who will use a Basalt Flask, but it will still be good for some people. Aquamarine Flasks are getting changed to have 40% reduced effective freeze on you, which means that if you do get frozen while an Aquamarine Flask is up, you can still act. These will probably actually see use as a result. Then we have this example shows one of the new Flask enchants. So Enkindling Orbs and Instilling Orbs will add enchantments to utility flasks. Instilling Orbs cause them to become triggered. So you will be able to use them when a certain condition is met. An example of that is this Topaz Flask of Grounding here, used when you become shocked. And then that will grant you immunity to shock for a second, if used while shocked. So that means that there's quite a strong synergy there. The Enkindling Orb will cause utility flasks to have more effect than usual, but will prevent it from gaining charges during its effect. So again, this is all about that tactical use of flask charges. 46% increased effect, gains no charges during flask effect. Ultimately, what I think we're going to see here is a lot less 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gameplay, and much more tactical use of flasks, but this is going to make the game considerably harder. There's also the Corundum Flasks, which increase your stun threshold, and you can't be stunned if you've been stunned during the flask effect. And then we have the Gold Flask, which is just rubbish because increased item rarity is a rubbish stat in pretty much every situation. Next we have Path of Exile Royale, which looks like it's just going to be so much fun to have back. I'm hanging for it. I'm going to definitely be playing it. And there's a lot of changes that have been made, like downscales of various unique items in order to make them available in the Royale mode, and lots of changes to downscaling of skills. So, you got access to Ball Lightning at low level, which is normally a higher level skill, all sorts of things like that. A new passive tree that is only for Battle Royale. Just so much good stuff here. This looks like it's going to be fantastic, and as soon as I've finished recording this, I'm going to give it a go. Lastly, you've got the supporter packs. So ultimately, what we're looking at here is a lot of new skill gems that will create some new options for playing the game. The League mechanic gives me Legion vibes more than anything else, although we'll have to see other people's thoughts on that. And then there's going to be the massive overall overarching difficulty changes. That's it. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you have a good one. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.